they can watch that later. So this is the first in our series of the Summer Scholars series. Next month, we will have Joe Carlson talking about Dante. And Joe is currently translating or finishing up his own translation of Dante's Divine Comedy. And he's finishing up his doctorate at the same school that Dr. Grieser went to, the University of Dallas. And then in August, we're still talking to a potential speaker. So I can't reveal who that will be, but looks like it'll be a fantastic time in August. So I'll send out emails about all that later. All right, so jumping right in, Dr. Jayson Grieser is a fellow of literature at New St. Andrews College, where he also coordinates the senior year team taught integrated humanities course, Traditio Occidentis. He joined the college in 2007 after doing his MA and doctorate at the University of Dallas. And even before that, he and I were at New St. Andrews together back in the good old days, a long time ago. He and his wife, Hannah, have 5 sons. And Dr. Grieser just came out with this book, which looks really exciting. Co-edited with Douglas Wilson, Calvinist Poetry. Yes, you didn't know that Calvinists could write poets. Well, this book will help you to realize the error of your ways. So check that out. And then Dr. Johnston is the rector of Trinity Anglican Church in Lafayette, Louisiana, and is a ministry president of Anglican Compass. He holds a PhD in English from the University of Louisiana in Lafayette, with a dissertation on John Milton's Paradise Lost. He lives on a small family farm with his wife, Carla, and their 7 children. So thank you for doing this, gentlemen, and I'll hand it over to Dr. Grieser.
All right. Thank you. Just to add to your comment there, Gregory, I mean, Milton might be the greatest of the Calvinist poets. I guess we could talk about that today a bit. But I've been teaching Paradise Lost for many years, and had the pleasure of meeting Peter last summer. He came out to Moscow to check out what we were doing and went to the music camp, and I think sat in on some of Pastor Wilson's summer writing classes. And we just had a great time talking about Milton over at Bootzer's and at Taft, and at my house. We got together 3 times and just really enjoyed each other. And then I drove him to Spokane, and we talked about poetry and Milton all the way there. And I can tell you he's got some really excellent insights into the poem, having just written his dissertation in a kind of mode of C.S. Lewis and Charles Williams and some of the great Christian readers of the poem. But he has his own insights as well, as you'll see today. Well, let's start. We have a lot to cover, and I want to try to cover as much of the poem as we can to give you some material to think about and possibly as teachers to incorporate into your own teaching. Let's start right at the beginning of the poem. Gregory, can you put that text back up, or is it already up?
So if you could, I guess, reshare your screen, that should do it. Okay. Sorry.
Yeah. See if that works. Does that work?
Yeah, there we go.
So this is the Milton reading room, and you get a lot of Milton. I think it's pretty much all of Milton's poetry, some of his prose as well. The nice thing, these are hyperlinks. You can click on these and get little notes about each of these that are pretty helpful from different scholars.
Jayson, or rather Dr. Grieser.
Yeah.
I'm by the way, everybody, I'm serving in the capacity of the color commentator here. So, Dr. Grieser is our lead announcer to lead us through this. And then I'll just jump in and give you little remarks and comments. But you'll notice that the Milton Reading Room here online, which is a great resource, is hosted and published by Dartmouth College. And the reason that this is interesting is that Dartmouth College, for a very long time, many, many decades, maybe even more than a century, required Paradise Lost as freshman reading for all students. So this was the standard book that all Dartmouth undergrads read and discussed. And that wasn't true, in every college, but it does give you just a sense of what education, higher education actually was like in our country for a long time, and we've just kind of forgotten that at this point.
Excellent. And you know, the classical Christian education movement, I think prepares the student for this text, right, Peter? They need to know
Exactly.
their Bibles, and they need to know theology. You know, Milton's really, he knows the church fathers very well. He knows Augustine very well, and he knows all the myths and, you know, the tragedies and so forth of the ancient world. So he's bringing all that together in his poem. And so I like to tell students that all their classical education has prepared them to read Paradise Lost, and not just to read it, but to enjoy it, and just enjoy what Milton's doing. They see a lot of Latin references in here. They see, you know, how he's expanding on the Bible. And we'll get into some of the controversies around Milton, but you can imagine trying to do what he's doing. He's really taking the whole story of the world from the very beginning when rebellion happened in heaven, all the way to the end of the world. So epics typically will tell the story of the way a people sees what's important in the world. You think of the Greeks and their epics. And then, as Lewis points out in Preface to Paradise Lost, that story kind of gets bigger with Virgil, the founding of the Roman Empire. It's kind of a bigger story than just the fall of Troy. And then, you know, you could go through history, but when Milton gets there, he decides, you know, what's the bigger story? And well, how about the story of the fall of man? And within that story, he can encompass everything. So let's look at this beginning here. Instead of starting with glorifying man, as the heroic code tends to do in an epic, it's about sin at the beginning, isn't it? Of man's first disobedience and the fruit. Look at that. He just leaves the fruit there hanging there at the end of the line. This is called an enjambed line, where it's not complete on its own. He loves to enjam his line, so it pulls you into the next line. Of man's first disobedience and the fruit, you could take that literally, metaphorically, like the outcome of that disobedience. Fruit of that forbidden tree, whose mortal taste brought death into the world and all our woe, with loss of Eden, till one greater man restore us and regain the blissful seat. All that's the dependent clause. And then here we get the main clause: sing, heavenly muse. Continues that on the secret top of Oreb or of Sinai didst inspire that shepherd who first taught the chosen seed in the beginning how the heavens and earth rose out of chaos. Right? You see Genesis 1 language in there. He's got Oreb or Sinai, two different names for Moses on the mountain. And then we have Zion Hill. So we have David here, the great poets of the Bible. Zion Hill, delight thee more, Siloa's brook that flowed fast by the oracle of God. I thence invoke thy aid to my adventurous song, that with no middle flight intends to soar above the Ionian mount, while it pursues things unattempted yet in prose or rhyme. All right, just remarkable statement right there.
Dr. Grieser, don't you love how the word fruit just kind of dangles on the end of that line? I mean, it's just like that beautiful, you know, fruit that Eve was looking at on the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. You just want to go out and pluck it, you know?
Yes. Oh, so much. And every he ends his lines, you know, it's been said the end of the line is the most emphatic part of a poetic line. And every one of those words, fruit, taste, woe, man, seat, top, inspire, seed, earth. I mean, Milton never wastes those spots. And, you know, when you're dealing with a poet at this level, right, everything matters, everything's important. The positions of the lines, the sounds of the words, the way the lines flow into each other, those enjambments is full of energy. It's been likened to organ music. Okay, it's wonderful to hear it out loud, to have students read it out loud in class and to listen to the sounds of his words. All right, Peter, what does he mean by soaring above the Ionian Mount?
Well, you go back to classical references of Pegasus, right, and the flight, right, the poetic flight. And basically, you know, this is the vision of the poet. The poet. So I guess one point to understand is that in the classical world, remember, Homer is understood to be blind physically, but to be able to see almost in a sense, by virtue of his physical blindness, he can see into the deep matter of things. And of course, the irony here is that, Homer was only purportedly blind. There's a lot of debate amongst historians and scholars whether Homer was actually blind physically, but Milton was blind, right? So by the time Milton actually composed Paradise Lost, he had gone blind physically. And at the beginning of book 3, we get an invocation where he speaks, more specifically to that. But the idea is that there's a certain prophetic character associated with physical blindness that's appropriate to the poet, and that kind of seer, ancient classical vision of the seer or biblical vision of the prophet, who doesn't see physically but can see by virtue of that much further, then enables you to accomplish this kind of ambitious poetry. So, he pursues things unattempted yet in prose or rhyme.
And he's soaring above the classical mountain of the muses, right? He's doing something far more significant than they did. Is that part of it?
Yes, of course. Like the story of the Pegasus, the flying horse.
Okay. Adventurous song. Does he recognize the risk of the danger here?
Well, Milton's entire career is defined by his extreme ambition. I would say you don't really get a full sense of acknowledgement of danger until the next poem, Paradise Regained, which is much more stripped back and spare in its style. It feels like he's recognized the danger of his kind of elaborate style in Paradise Lost. Later on, he'll basically claim that what is given to him in Paradise Lost is not his own, but really does come from the Holy Spirit. So, he might recognize the danger, but he thinks that it comes from God. Okay.
Now, unattempted yet in prose or rhyme is interesting in that his poem doesn't rhyme, but he must just mean poetry there. But this was kind of surprising for someone in his day, 17th century, to open this up and say, wait a minute, where's the rhyming? I'm used to Spenser. What's going on here? Epic poems like Fairy Queen, or, it's supposed to rhyme. But he says, look, you don't need to be, you're addicted to the jingles and jangles, right, of rhymed. And he loved Spenser, but he wasn't doing that. He said, I'm going back to Homer and Virgil. They didn't rhyme. So I'm going to do the same thing in English.
I think there's a bit of, certainly there's a little bit of criticism of other English poets, but maybe even of Dante, because Dante had built on the epic tradition, but he built his own poetic form where rhyme was central, and Milton is not going to do that.
Okay, so this is maybe we could say more modern style of writing. It's influenced like Wordsworth and other romantic poets. If they said, hey, we don't have to do rhyme, we could write in blank verse. Now, Shakespeare had done that in his plays, but it hadn't been done in this way before. So let's move on to the end of this proem here. We have chiefly thou, O Spirit, right? He is calling on the Holy Spirit. And there's a whole debate about, what does he mean? Peter just mentioned about, how inspired is he, or what does he mean by that? We probably won't get into that. It's just too thorny of an issue, but he might just mean, look, I have prayer, I have the Bible, I have the Christian tradition, I have that kind of prophecy, I have that truth, that deep truth that the pagans did not have. So the Holy Spirit is my guide. The text of Scripture is my guide. And he ends with, that to the height of this, support me that to the height of this great argument or subject, I may assert eternal providence and justify the ways of God to men. All right. And maybe you could say there's a way in which all epics are trying to explain the ways of the gods, remove the veil and show you the gods at work and what's going on behind the scene. You see that in epic. That's a feature of the genre. But Milton's, I think, has much more ammunition to do that, because he has the entire Christian tradition. He has answers and he has knowledge that they did not have being a Christian. He has that that knowledge and wisdom that they did not have. So he's going to explain, for instance, why is Satan rather allowed to just roam about? He is called the devil and Satan, I guess, both in the poem. So, and he says, if we go to line 210, let's just skip there for a second. He says that he's chained on the burning lake right here at 210. And he would never have raised his head, but that the will and high permission of all ruling heaven left him at large to his own dark designs. Why? That with reiterated crimes, he might heap on himself damnation while he sought evil to others, and enraged might see how all his malice served but to bring forth infinite goodness, grace, and mercy shown on man by him seduced, but on himself trouble, confusion, wrath, and vengeance poured. Okay, so this is one of the ways in which the ways of God are justified. Why didn't God just leave Satan chained up? And Milton wants to reveal here the way of God is to allow Satan to sort of heap further judgment on himself and then to bring forth goodness. All right, so when we get to the end of the poem, we're going to see how it's all turned to good by God's goodness. All right, let's jump into book one then with the theme of Satan in the heroic, having looked at the proem a little bit, the purpose of the poem to justify the ways of God to men, the way he uses a poetic line, at least briefly we looked at that, and the classical and Christian elements here mixed together, but the Christian being the higher, of course, that fulfills all the myths of the ancient world, and how those two things go together, but the Christian is the fulfillment of all the pagans. I think Milton's very good on that point. Now, there's as you all know, the controversy about Satan. Why does he make Satan the way he is in this kind of heroic mold? Is that appropriate? I even had a grad student tell me, I can't read this. He started reading this, said, this is like glorifying evil. I can't read this. He said, I have a rough background. This is just too tempting to me. So I was like, okay. I asked the dean, what do I do? And the dean said, well, just have him read some extra George Herbert. So we had him read some extra George Herbert. And we didn't make him read Paradise Lost, but I think you're missing out on something here. And I want Peter to talk about this, but what is he doing with Satan? But let's look at a couple of lines, like 92, where Satan speaks here. He goes on to say something like, with God with his thunder, till then, who knew that the force of those dire arms, yet not for those, nor what the potent victor in his rage can else inflict. You think of the way pagans talk about God. He's enraged. He's mean. He's angry. Like he's depicting God in this kind of fallen psychology. He's looking at heaven and seeing it as this terrible place of tyranny, and God is this inflicting on him in his rage, this judgment. His people in hell will probably say forever, right? And he is, let's see, with high disdain and from sense of injured merit, that with the mightiest raised me to contend, to that fierce contention brought along innumerable force of spirits armed. This is kind of difficult language, but he's saying, many spirits came with me, many of the angels came with me as we felt injured in some way. Our merit was injured. We'll look at that when we get to book 6 here in a few minutes, but we shook his throne, right? Then he says, what though the field be lost in 105? All is not lost. The unconquerable will, the study of revenge, immortal hate, and the courage never to submit or yield. Okay, and if we pursue that route, what else not to be overcome? We can overcome anything. This is a very rousing speech by Satan, this kind of military, discourse, rousing the troops. Let's not give up hope. We've been thrown out of heaven, but hey, we can get it back. Okay. And one other thing, let's look at the 125 here. So the apostate angel spake, though in pain, vaunting aloud, but racked with deep despair. And then then Beelzebub speaks with him here a little bit. And then the famous lines about let's see, 250 here. He's like, Satan's saying things like, hey, let's make this our new home. The mind is its own place. It is its own self. It can make a heaven of hell or a hell of heaven. What matter where, if I be the same? Then he goes on to say, better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. Okay, he has this kind of language that really resonates with us. And we might even like, wow, I kind of, that's really like my student, that's tempting me in a bad way here. What's going on? So Peter, what do we do with this kind of heroic language coming from Satan, our enemy?
Yeah. Well, it does resonate with us. I mean, just to make the point, some of you may be familiar with Tennyson's poem Ulysses, right? You remember how that ends? To strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield, right? So there's this sense of what it means to be the modern man is to be resilient and to not yield under pressure, right? To have the unconquerable will, which is what Satan describes here. Satan quite literally is like, pulling himself up by his bootstraps, right? Off of the lake of fire and hell. And so this deeply resonates with us. And it's not, the reality is, if you look at our politics, both sides of our politics are usually trying to figure out how to capture the spirit of the modern man who can be, self-sustaining and self-powerful. And, why does, or how does Milton depict this? Where does he get this? And why does he put this in the figure of Satan? And the first thing that we have to realize is that this is about, overcoming defeat. So one way of entering into this imaginatively is if you were to retell the story of the creation and the fall, right? Genesis 1-3. Where would you start the story? And this is one of the things I ask my students when I teach about Paradise Lost, right? Where would you start it and why? And some students say, oh, well, I would start with, the temptation itself, right? The story opens with the serpent tempting Eve. Some say, well, I would start with, the moment when Adam is with the animals looking for a helper, a partner, can't find one.
Yeah.
And you might have different reasons for starting the story in those different places, but the only rule is you can't start with creation, because this is an epic, right? It's in medias res. Epics have to start in the middle of things. So you can't start at the beginning. You have to start somewhere in the middle and then go back. Well, Milton chooses to start with this moment, an extra biblical moment in a sense, right? It's not in the text of Genesis 1-3, of the fallen demons. Augustine says this is in Genesis 1. It's when, God separates the light from the darkness. So why does Milton start here? And here it's helpful to remember a few historical details about Milton. Milton was one of the major leaders of the revolutionary effort in England. He was the chief propagandist for the Cromwell regime. He was deeply involved in a attempted and for a while successful revolution, right? But that revolution ultimately failed, and by the time Milton started to write Paradise Lost, it was clear, if it hadn't already happened, that the restoration was coming. So Milton himself was a defeated revolutionary. And we start with Satan as a defeated revolutionary. Right? And so this, amongst a variety of other reasons, are, some scholars and commentators have basically seen Milton as being ultimately on Satan's side, because he understands the psychology of the defeated revolutionary, right? But not only that, he gives Satan this incredible part, right? He's the first speaking part in the epic. This is where the story begins. He's got the dazzling rhetoric, and he embodies all of these heroic roles. And this is what Dr. Grieser is referring to. You know, he speaks in a way that is reminiscent of some of the great heroes like Achilles and Odysseus. He also undertakes a journey like Odysseus does. He has internal psychological dynamics that are reminiscent of the rage of Achilles. In so many ways, Satan resembles the heroes of classical epic. And so you have to ask, well, what's going on? You know, why does Milton depict him this way? And ultimately, I think the answer is that Milton is wanting to show Satan as a classical hero, but he also wants to show that ultimately the virtues and the model of classical heroism are not the same as Christian heroism.
Mm-hmm.
So in other words, he's going to present a literary vision of classical heroism, but then undermine it from the inside. Right.
That's excellent.
And we're going to see that in the way that, you know, many of the aspects of classical heroism in the figure of Satan don't actually pan out. Right. Mm-hmm. We'll see the war in heaven, and classical heroes go into battle like Satan does, and they fight on behalf of their people like Satan does. But, you know, they win, and Satan doesn't. Satan is defeated, and in fact, he's defeated in a very unheroic way. I mean, not to jump too far ahead, but you know, how does book 6 end in the war in heaven? Basically, Jesus chases the Satan and the demons out of heaven, and at the very, you know, end of that dramatic moment, the demons throw themselves out of heaven because they cannot bear the terrible might of the Son of God.
In his chariot, the paternal chariot. Right?
In his eternal chariot, right.
Yeah, awesome.
So Satan is a classical hero, but classical heroism, it turns out, doesn't hold a candle next to the might of Christ.
Excellent. And Milton's going to propose at the beginning of book 9, the kind of heroism that hasn't been sung about, which is a Christian version. We'll look at that in a minute. So let's jump to book 3. So the first 2 books that are in hell, and then in 3 we jump into heaven, and we have Hail Holy Light. So now we're in a realm of light. We were in a realm of darkness. Contrast here between books 1 and 2, and now we're in 3. Darkness versus light. God is light. You know, who may express the unblamed? You know, there's a sense in which Milton knows that, you know, this is way over his head. He's depending on the Spirit here to guide him. And he even mentions, I think it's here, is this part where he mentions his blindness? Yeah, cut off. So that light, he says, I'm cut off from that light. The cheerful ways of man, line 46, cut off, presented with a universal blank of nature's works, to me expunged and raised. So inwardly, shine inward, and in the mind through all her powers irradiate their plant eyes. All mist from thence purge and disperse, that I may see and tell of things invisible to mortal sight. Milton has these personal moments at the beginning of these books occasionally. And this is something that you don't see in classical epics. And Dr. Johnston commented on this, and he said, you know, these are kind of extra to the story. They don't really belong, literarily, they don't really belong, but who would take them out? They're so beautiful. And so when Milton sort of talks about his own situation, as he does here at the beginning of book 3, but let's look at, we have the Father and the Son talking about the rebellion that's going on. They're up in heaven watching it, and you have Milton trying to depict this. How does he do? Let's look at what lines did I mark here? So 80 to 99. Only begotten Son, seest thou what rage transports our adversary, whom no bounds prescribed, no bars of hell, nor all the chains heaped on him there, nor yet the main abyss wide interrupt can hold. So bent he seems on desperate revenge, and shall redound upon his own rebellious head. And now through all restraint broke loose, he wings his way not far off heaven, in the precincts of light, directly towards the new created world, and man there placed with purpose to assay, to test man. So that in book 2, the demons debate, what do we do next? We've been defeated. What do we do? They decide to send Satan to go. Well, actually, Satan himself kind of rigs it so that he gets picked to go to this new world and tempt this new creature that God's created and try to get back at God that way, get revenge on God. Now we still need to get to what is he mad about, and what does he need revenge for? We'll see that when we get to book 5 in just a second here. But I love the line here. Whose fault is this, says the Father, that man will fall? Whose fault is this? Whose but his own? Ingrate. He had of me all he could have. I made him just and right, sufficient to have stood, though free to fall. Okay, so book 3, line 99. I love that line. It sums up so much theology in just one line, sufficient to have stood, though free to fall. Okay, so, and he uses alliteration there, so you'll never forget it. Man was made sufficient to stand, though free to fall. The angels as well. I created all the powers this way, says God. So it's not my fault, right? Beginning of the Odyssey, Zeus says something like this. It's not my fault that all these things are happening. It's man's fault for his own immorality. So is this a way of God justifying himself? Okay, that's part of the argument against it. Some people say, doesn't God sound defensive here? We just saw all this fancy rhetoric from Satan, and now we get to God, and he sounds kind of defensive and unattractive. All right, so others say, no, this is how God should talk. He shouldn't be rhetorically polished and like Satan. He should just speak plain truth and doctrine. So you'll have to decide on your own what you think of this. Does Milton succeed here in having God speak? And again, this is part of the ambitiousness of the poem, is that he fills in a lot of gaps, extra biblical gaps of the story, makes, just using his own imagination, his own study to kind of come up with the best answers and the best matter to fill in those gaps. But here he's got the Son speaking. And then look at what happens. The Son speaks to the Father. Beyond all compare, the Son was seen, most glorious in him, all his Father shone, substantially expressed, and in his face, divine compassion visibly appeared. Love without end and without measure grace, which uttering thus to his Father spake. O Father, gracious was the word which closed thy sovereign sentence, that man should find grace. All right, the Father ends his speech above saying that since man wasn't deceived, man is going to be deceived by Satan. The angels weren't deceived, they will not find grace. Since man was deceived, he will find grace. And then the Son says, let's see, that man should find grace, for which both heaven shall high extol thy praises. For should man finally be lost, should man thy creature loved so late so loved, thy youngest son fall circumvented thus by fraud. Far be it from thee that you would do that, Father, and abolish thy own creation. And then there's this moment where, how is that going to be accomplished? And I have, let's see, 250. And this famous line here, the Son says, right, let's start a little bit before that. Is it 235? I think I put down the wrong line there. 235. Behold me then, me for him, life for life I offer. On me let thine anger fall. Account me man. I for his sake will leave thy bosom, and his glory, this glory next to thee freely put off. And for him lastly die. Well pleased, on me let death wreak all his rage. Okay. And so, Peter, what do you make of Milton's depiction of the Father and the Son here in book 3? Is it is this something that a poet should even try to do? And does Milton succeed here?
Well, so the comparison to Dante is another interesting one here. Dante uses more metaphorical and symbolic kind of depictions to try to get at the ineffable mystery of the Trinity. And there's a theological truth to what Dante is doing. But Milton is closely tied to the scriptures. And, the scriptures have God speaking. I mean, we actually, have the person of God speaking. Now, we don't get as detailed a conversation in the scriptures between the Father and the Son like we have here. But there are passages that you can use that, give you a sense of a conversation happening in heaven. Look at the beginning of Job, for example, or look at John 17, where Jesus, the incarnate Son, is having his conversation in prayer with the Father. So I think Milton draws upon those biblical examples and then imaginatively constructs the conversation between the Father and the Son in heaven. And I think part of what's important here is not only the content of the conversation, but also the style in how they address each other. Look at 274. It's right in front of us, right? O thou in heaven and earth, the only peace found out for mankind under wrath. O thou, my soul complacence. This is a remarkable, vocative, direct address from the Father to the Son. And if you actually were to go through Paradise Lost and analyze the forms of address between all the different characters, you would find that the forms of address between the Father and the Son are some of the most beautiful and most varied. And really they reflect Trinitarian theology. So, in other words, Milton is trying to get at the mystery of the Trinity as well, but in a different way, through the forms of interaction between the Father and the Son, and in trying to depict the nature of the Son's sacrifice. Does it open up to certain kinds of, possible, edges of heretical thinking? Sure. But I think the Bible does that too, right? The Bible depicts God with body parts, even though God doesn't have body parts, right? God with an outstretched arm brings out his people. Well, God doesn't have an arm. He's a spirit. So what's going on? Well, the Bible, God through his spirit, right, is speaking to his people, condescending to them in a way that we can understand. And I think Milton is doing something similar. He's trying to help us to understand or enter into the mystery of the Trinitarian relation.
Why do some people say that Milton's not Trinitarian?
Well, there's a couple of reasons. The main reason is there's a book that was published 150 years after Milton's death called On Christian Doctrine. It was literally found in a drawer. It was a manuscript that was found in a drawer and then attributed to Milton. And it was something of a kind of a personal speculative theology. And there's a lot of debate about whether it was really Milton who wrote it or not. I think most scholars now think it probably was him. And that text includes a variety of denials of classical Trinitarian language. Now, there's a further debate as to whether that means he was non-Trinitarian or just a different kind of Trinitarian. I would argue that he was trying to revisit some of the classical categories for how to understand the Trinity, but that he was still Trinitarian. In any case, a lot of scholars read Paradise Lost through that text, which is On Christian Doctrine, which I think is not an appropriate way to read it, because Milton never published this document in his lifetime, and it can very strongly bias your understanding of the text of Paradise Lost itself.
So he may have, let's say he was anti-Trinitarian in some way, although I think you're right. He could have been some kind of subordinationist, like some of the church fathers were, not necessarily anti-Trinitarian. But let's say those are his private views, and he's kind of working those out and trying to just kind of thinking through some of those. Some of those are heretical. Doesn't mean he put those in his great poem that he's been working on all his life. Why would he put those in his poem? So I think that.
Yeah, and I mean, if you scroll up, I'll just give you an example. I mean, so go to the beginning of book 3 here.
Okay.
So not the invocation.
Okay.
Okay. So
was it where the son responds?
Yeah, right there. Okay, that's good.
Right here?
Yes. So you see where it says, beyond compare, the Son of God was seen most glorious. In him, all his Father shone substantially expressed. And in his face, divine compassion visibly appeared. All right, so there's some technical language being used here, right? His Father shone substantially expressed. So this has to do with whether you understand the unity of the Father and the Son through the Greek metaphysical terminology or the Latin metaphysical terminology. So in the Nicene Creed, we say that the Son is homoousios, right, of one substance with the Father. Milton, in his speculative theology on Christian doctrine, he says that the unity of the Father and the Son is not in essence, ousia, but rather in substance, substantia. So Milton makes a distinction between Greek and Latin metaphysics, because he thinks that the Latin terms and the meanings of the Latin substantia will better capture the unity between the Father and the Son. So some people take that distinction and they say, oh, well, in him all his Father shone substantially expressed. He's embedding anti-Trinitarian theology in this. I would say, if he used the word essentially expressed versus if he used the word substantially expressed, on any plain reading, it's basically the same thing, because substantia is the standard Latin translation of the Greek ousia. Okay. And in any case, what is happening? What is being described, right? In him, the Son, his Father shone substantially.
Yeah.
So there's clearly an attempt to define the unity of the Father and the Son. And I think it's going way too far to say, oh, well, this is, this demonstrates his non-Trinitarianism.
Very good. Let's go on to book 4. Famous soliloquy of Satan. And isn't this, Peter, the first thing Milton wrote?
So this is the earliest text that we have reference to in the various manuscripts and letters by his friends. And this is the first text that is referenced. So we think it might have been one of the earliest things he wrote for the poem. And one key thing to recognize here is that it's in comparison to that invocation to light. So in beginning of book 3, right, Milton is speaking about Hail Holy Light. And now Satan is speaking. Satan sees the sun, and this prompts Satan to his own speech, his own kind of invocation of light. But this light, whereas for Milton, right, who can't see visually the light, the celestial light emboldens him. For Satan, seeing physical light makes him dejected. Why? Because brightness shows him or reminds him of his own darkness, right? Satan used to be Lucifer, the light bearer, the bright angel in heaven, but in his fallen condition, he has been darkened. And so if you look, for example, at 42, or start with 37, actually, right? O son, to tell thee how I hate thy beams that bring to my remembrance from what state I fell, how glorious once above thy sphere, till pride and worse ambition threw me down, warring in heaven against heaven's matchless king. Ah, wherefore? He deserved no such return from me, whom he created what I was in that bright eminence, and with his good upbraided none, nor was his service hard. So we see a moment of clarity from Satan where he is recognizing
Oh, no. Did we lose him for a minute?
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll keep going. Hopefully he'll be back.
forgetful what from him I still received.
Okay, yeah, so anyway, she's.
Peter, we lost you there for a second.
Oh, okay. Am I back?
Yes.
Okay.
We don't have a video, but we can hear you.
Oh, okay. Let's see video. Let's get this back. Start my video.
There we go.
Oh man, right when I was reading too, huh? Where did we lose it?
It was a cool pose though when you got froze.
Yeah,
You were saying we have this moment of clarity from Satan.
right. So we have this moment of clarity from him where he's seen his own sin and how challenging and difficult he has made his own situation, right? And so he even considers whether he might repent. So go down to line 73. Right. Me miserable, which way shall I fly? Infinite wrath and infinite despair. Which way I fly is hell, myself am hell, and in the lowest deep, a lower deep, still threatening to devour me, opens wide, to which the hell I suffer seems a heaven. Oh, then at last relent. Is there no place left for repentance, none for pardon left? None left but by submission. And that word disdain forbids me. So he recognizes what he needs to do, right? He needs to turn back and repent. And he says, maybe I could even do it, but I would have to submit, right? I'd have to be obedient to God. And this he refuses to do. He refuses to be obedient.
Like a hero from Homer, right? Dread of shame. Hector can't go back in the city. He was wrong about the prophecy. Oh, the prophet told him, go back in the city and you'll be safe. He said, I can't out of shame, you know.
Right.
So he suffers horribly. Hell, he says, I am hell. And what's coming after me, after in judgment below is so much worse that what I suffer now feels like heaven. Wow, that is miserable. All right, so this is the great soliloquy of Satan where he admits, I am a creature of God. He didn't deserve this. It's on me. But he's going to deny all this in public. But here in this private moment of soliloquy where we usually see inside the character and they tell us the truth about what's going on inside them, we find all this truth coming out. But he decides, since he can't repent or he was unwilling to repent, that evil be thou my good. Okay. Farewell, all remorse, all good to me is lost. Evil be thou my good. By thee, at least, divided empire with heaven's king I hold by thee. And more than half perhaps will reign. So he sets up this alternate kingdom, this parody of God's kingdom.
Yeah. And the doubling down is reminiscent of Macbeth, right? Macbeth, after his own sin, considers whether he ought to repent and decides not and doubles down on his willful sin. Very
good. All right, let's talk about Adam and Eve. So when Satan approaches them, he's taken this journey out of hell, and he's come to the new creation of earth, and he sees these two new creatures that have been created to replace the fallen angels, man and woman. And he sees them, he says, too far nobler. This is 288, book 4. Back up one more. Of living creatures new to sight and strange, two of far nobler shape, erect and tall, godlike erect, with native honor clad, in naked majesty seemed lords of all. And worthy seemed, for in their looks divine the image of their glorious maker shone, truth, wisdom, sanctitude severe and pure, severe in true filial freedom placed, whence true authority in men. Though both not equal, as their sex not equal seemed, for contemplation he in valor formed, for softness she in sweet attractive grace. He for God only, she for God in him. His fair large front and eye sublime declared absolute rule, and hyacinthine locks round from his parted forelock manly hung, clustering, but not beneath his shoulders broad. She as a veil down to the slender waist, her unadorned golden tresses wore, disheveled but in wanton ringlets waved, as the vine curls her tendrils, which implied subjection, but required with gentle sway, and by her yielded, by him best received, yielded with coy submission, modest pride, in sweet reluctant amorous delay. Okay, so this you can see in a contemporary university would just blow up the classroom. This, describing man and woman in these different terms. They're not equal, and I think what Milton means there is they're not the same. As Satan's looking at them, he sees there's difference between just the way they look. Their hair's different, their bodies are different. One suggests contemplation and rule, and the other softness and sweet attractive grace. Now, I think it's unfair though to say, okay, so I guess Eve's going to be a joke, right? The rest of the poem. Eve is actually one of the, I think, far more interesting than Adam. Great character that Milton creates, and she's I think, Peter, you'd say Milton's really doing something far from casting all the blame on the woman, as a lot of the medieval tradition does. He really has a very full picture of woman. I don't know that it's obviously it's not perfect. I mean, it's Milton's art. It has a, it's limited by his own time, but I think you could say a lot of this is coming right out of Paul, right?
Yeah. So, look at the reference to hair. Even the discussion of hair actually is reminiscent of Paul's discussion of, men's hair versus women's hair, right? She has a veil down to the slender waist, her unadorned golden tresses wore, right? And, uses the word subjection there, which literally means being under, right? Yeah. So she's underneath the hair, which implies submission to her husband. But notice that this is not oppression. So, you read this in a modern context and it's, he's so oppressive. Well, it's not. There is no oppression going on here. And notice it's by her yielded, by him best received, yielded with coy submission, modest pride, and sweet reluctant amorous delay. And so there's a strong contrast to, for example, Marvell's poem on his coy mistress, which is all about, a man who is speaking in that poem, basically telling the woman that he's pursuing, stop being so coy and turning away, because time is fleeting. And so we need to, make love now. It's a seize the day moment, which is very, very different from the picture that we get here, which is, Eve is coy, but it's coy submission. And they come together. And so the fact of the matter is Adam and Eve are depicted as being very happy in their union before the fall. And And Eve is a wonderful character in this poem. She is the heroine, actually, of the two later on after the fall. She's the first to repent and the first to inspire the turn back to God that ultimately they need to have. So it's we can't obviously cover everything about them, but they're both deeply developed and fully rounded characters.
One Renaissance scholar I was reading said, you'd expect the person reading it in his day would expect it to say, he forgot only, she for him. But as she forgot only, he forgot only, she for God in him.
Yeah, slight modification to Paul, actually.
Yeah. Let's see, one other thing I was going to point out here. This, to try to depict unfallen Adam and Eve for hundreds of lines, you just think of the difficulty of trying to do such a thing. And that's what Milton's doing. He's depicting it. No one's done this before to this length. Unfallen Adam and Eve, how would they talk to each other? How would they understand each other? You know, Milton's got to depict all of that for us. And you might say, well, you know, you could imagine an assignment where you said, write out a theology of the Garden of Eden with Adam and Eve in it. Okay, that would be one thing. But you say, write out Adam and Eve as characters and have them talk and have them live in the garden. How much more difficult that would be to depict. Okay, so the level of difficulty here is as high as it can be for literature. And Milton is, so you got to remember what he's dealing with here. There's some wonderful descriptions here of the garden, but we have to skip over that. And then Satan seeing this, oh hell, you know, what do my eyes with grief behold? He's envious of their happiness. The way Adam and Eve speak is, there's a chapter in Lewis's Preface on Paradise Lost. I'll refer you to that. It's because we don't really have time to get into it, but they speak to each other in very high language. And Lewis says, we might have the mistaken idea that Adam and Eve, we could kind of pat them on the head. Like we're so much more sophisticated than they are. He said it's the exact opposite. You would blush with shame to be in their presence. You'd feel like a midget. They're a king and a queen of the creation. And Milton depicts them with such dignity and such understanding of the world. They're not simpletons. So that's a mistake that we might make thinking about Adam and Eve, and Milton blows that away. But let's go to what happens. Interesting thing happens here is, I love let's see if I can find the right one. 440. It's got to touch on this really quick. When Eve first finds herself, Peter, isn't this one of the greatest moments where she's looking in the pool?
Yeah.
Eve wakes up, you know, the rib is taken from Adam's side and she's created. And she says, I first awaked at 4:50, found myself reposed under a shade of flowers, much wondering where and what I was, whence thither brought and how. Not distant far from thence, a murmuring sound of waters issued from a cave and spread into a liquid plain, then stood unmoved, pure as the expanse of heaven. So there's this pool of water. I thither went with unexperienced thought and laid me down on the green bank to look into the clear, smooth lake that to me seemed another sky. As I bent down to look, just opposite, a shape with a watery gleam appeared, bending to look on me. I stared back, it stared back, but pleased I soon returned. Pleased it returned as soon with answering looks of sympathy and love. There I had fixed mine eyes till now, and pined with vain desire, had not a voice thus warned me, what thou seest. Warn me what thou seest. What there thou seest, fair creature, is thyself. With thee it came and goes, but follow me, and I will bring thee where no shadow stays thy coming and thy soft embraces. He whose image thou art, him thou shalt enjoy, inseparably thine. To him shalt bear multitudes like thyself, and thence be called mother of human race. What could I do but follow straight, invisibly thus led, till I spied thee, fair indeed and tall, under a platane, yet methought less fair, less winning soft, less amiably mild than that smooth, watery image. Back I turned, thou following criest aloud, return, fair Eve, whom fliest thou? Whom thou fliest, of him thou art, of his flesh, his bone. To give thee being, I lent out of my side to thee, nearest my heart, substantial life. To have thee by my side henceforth, an individual solace dear. part of my soul, I seek thee, and thee claim my other half. With that thy gentle hand seized mine, I yielded, and from that time see how beauty is excelled by manly grace, and wisdom, which alone is truly fair. So there's a little humor here, is there not, where she looked at herself and fell in love with that image. God brings her to Adam, and she sees Adam is like, I like that image better. I'll go back to looking at myself. But she yields. Again, it's not oppressive. Says Adam reached out and seized, he says he with gentle hand he seized mine, I yielded. Right. Milton loves the idea of freedom and liberty. That's really what he's all about as a political thinker, right? And a lot of that comes into his understanding of marriage. And he also is very emphatic about marriage being a companionate marriage. It's got to be like here we see that she is his solace, individual solace dear. You have any thoughts on this line, this passage, Peter?
Well, Carson made a great note in the chat saying that, it's a revision of the Narcissus story, and that's exactly right. Narcissus sees the image of himself and stays there, and so it, there's kind of this idea that, well, that would have been Eve too, right? She would have just been staying there and looking at herself forever, but God intervened and brought her to Adam, and it is one of those great moments where you see the poetry mirroring the content. I love that moment in it where it says, I looked, I can't remember exactly, I looked there and then it looked back, reminding the image, and that's at the end of the line and the beginning of the next. So the mirroring that's happening in the water, it's happening in the poetry. And Milton is always playing with his form. He's using his lines to reflect the content of what's happening, like the fruit dangling on at the end of that first line. He's always doing that in the poem, and so it's he's playful and it's fun.
Very good. Yeah, and then that humor. I love the Eve turning away, Adam saying, "Where are you going? Come back, Eve." All right. So Raphael is an angel that comes down to the garden to tell Adam and Eve, to warn them about Satan's treachery, the enemy that's afoot. Make sure that you don't get deceived by this enemy. Raphael comes down. He tells them about Satan's rebellion, and a kind of flashback the way you'd see in the Odyssey. And I wanted to bring up the part here with the exaltation of the Son. So I said earlier, we get at what is Satan upset about? He's full of rage. Is it just because he was judged? Or if that is it, I guess. But what caused him to rebel? Milton's going to create a motive for Satan's rebellion. Right here at 600 is this the proclamation by the Father that the Son will be the Messiah. Okay, he says, this day I have begot whom I declare my only Son, and on this holy hill him have anointed, whom ye now behold at my right hand. Your head I him appoint. He's speaking to the angels. And by myself have sworn, to him shall bow all knees in heaven, and shall confess him Lord. Under his great vicegerent reign, abide united is one happy soul, forever happy. Him, whoever disobeys him, the Son, me disobeys, breaks union, and that day cast out from God, in blessed vision falls into utter darkness, deep engulfed, his place ordained, without redemption, without end. Okay, so Satan doesn't like this. Now, I was thinking about this. You say, well, does Satan imagine himself equal with the Son of God? We know from the Bible, don't we, from Isaiah 14, Ezekiel 28, there's allusions to Satan maybe thinking himself, he wanted to be higher than God, right? So God the Father, God the Son, he thinks of himself as higher than them. So it's to me, it's you could say this is ridiculous. He knows the Son. Why would he think he's greater than the Son? Well, he knows God, and he thinks he's greater than God the Father too. So here, he's unhappy with this exaltation of the Son. Now, Peter, is this saying that the Son was not divine before this moment?
No, So this comes from Psalm 2, right? If you recognize some of the language here, as well as Philippians 2, of course. But Psalm 2, right? On this holy hill, this day I declare, right? I have begot my only son. And this passage of the declaration of the son, right, was used classically by Arians to argue against the Trinity. And what Milton does is he takes this passage and he makes it literally the first moment to happen in the universe of Paradise Lost from a chronological perspective. So we're in book 5, right? And this is being told as a flashback, but this is the first thing, right? If you were to lay out on a chart everything that happens in Paradise Lost, chronologically speaking, this is the very first moment. And so what's happening, right? Basically, he's taking the declaration or proclamation of the Son as the Son and the one who is elevated as the Lord to be worshiped, and making it happen at the beginning of time. Okay? Well, it's actually before time, right? So in this story, and this is the problem or the challenge of writing it poetically, happens before creation, right? So this is before created time. It's happening in eternity. So you might even say that this actually is a poetic reflection of the idea in the Nicene Creed that the Son is eternally begotten of the Father, right? This is the eternal beginning that is happening. So I think Milton actually, in the way that he uses this passage, is kind of neutering the major argument that the Arians had.
Good. Okay, and then to I think add to that, Satan leads the rebellion, those who don't want to worship the Messiah, and see this as some kind of tyranny. When God says, I'm actually exalting you in him, they see it as Satan interprets it opposite of that. He's not exalting us in the Son. He's lowering us in the Son. Let's rebel. All right, he leads the rebellion. And one of the angels, though, turns back and sees Satan as a liar, and that's Abdiel. Abdiel is 809. His response is one of the most heroic moments from the good side against Satan. Is argument blasphemous, false, and proud. I never expected to hear such things in heaven. Expect least of all from thee, ingrate, and place thyself so high above thy peers. And he goes on to say, look at this line here. I love this. Is it unjust that equal over equal monarch reign? Okay, you could argue it's unjust to be reigned over by an equal, but he says, are you equal? Thyself, though great and glorious, dost thou count of all angelic nature joined in one, equal to him, only begotten Son, by whom by his word the Father made all things, even thee, and all the spirits of heaven by him created in bright degrees. You think you're equal to him when he created you? All the angels joined into one are not equal to the Son, he says here, 833 and following. He created, by the Son, he created all the angels in their bright degrees, crowned them with glory, and so forth. So Peter, isn't this one of the most important passages? This is a really important passage. Abdiel represents Milton's vision of Christian heroism under the conditions of sin. Okay, so the ultimate Christian, hero of the poem is Christ, but under the conditions of sin, Abdiel is the example of a great Christian hero. Why? Because he understands when you have to actually be disobedient in the service of a higher obedience. Right? So Abdiel is underneath Satan in the angelic hierarchy. In fact, he's a lowly figure. He's not one of the higher angels.
He's just underneath him. And all of the angels, right, that are following after Satan go along with him, right? They follow their leader because they think that what they're supposed to do is be obedient. And by the way, angels are generally obedient creatures in Paradise Lost, right? Generally, they do what they're told. Part of what Milton is trying to point out here is our duty is the obedience to God. And that means that there are times when we have to be willing to be disobedient to those who, within our created hierarchy, would call us to rebellion or sin against God. So Abdiel is in many ways Milton's own version of himself, right? Milton thought of himself as being obedient to God, and that's why he was disobedient to Charles I and the political structure in England. And in the first version of Paradise Lost, which was published in 1667, there were only 10 books, all of the content, but it was divided up into only 10 books. And the middle of the poem was Abdiel. Abdiel was the very center of the poem in the first edition. Now, in the second edition, he expanded it into 12 books for a variety of reasons. But one of those reasons and the result was that the very center of the poem was no longer Abdiel, but rather Christ. And so Milton ultimately decided that he wanted Christ to be the central heroic figure in the story, but Abdiel remains, one of the most important characters.
Just so you know, in terms of time, I think we'll try to finish by 2:30. So Christ is a hero shows up in book 6 with the you get this this war in heaven. So again, flashing back, Raphael's telling Adam and Eve about what happened in the rebellion, and it depicts the war in heaven between the angels. It's a lot of fun to read, and it has a lot of like ancient epic qualities of the warfare of the Iliad and that sort of thing, but it's angels fighting, so it has a cartoon-like feel to it. Some people don't think it's very good. I think it's great, and I love the end where the father sort of says, "Look, it's a tie, basically," but he sets it up that way so that the son can come out in his great chariot and destroy and get all the glory by destroying all. As Peter said earlier, is driving the angels out of, or they jump out. They jump out of the way. They're so terrified of the sun. And the depictions of the sun. Let's look at this really quick. Is the sun's victory, 760 of book 6. Let's see here. Yeah, there's some more language here, but the sun's deity, 680. Ascend my chariot, says the Father. The Son, I love the language here, O Father supreme of heavenly thrones, first, highest, holiest, best, thou always seekest to glorify thy Son. This is like John 17 moment. Chariot of paternal deity. This whole passage really, you should go through this with your students. It's one of the best moments in the poem. But I'm thinking of where he, let's see, so spake the Son, into terror changed, his countenance too severe to behold, and full of wrath bent on his enemies. At once the four spread out their starry wings with dreadful shade contiguous, and the orbs of his fierce chariot rolled as the sound of torrent floods or of a numerous host. He on his impious foes right onward drove, gloomy as night. Under his burning wheels the steadfast Empyrean shook throughout, all but the throne itself of God. Full soon among them he arrived, in his right hand grasping 10,000 thunders, which he sent before him, such as in their souls and fixed plagues. They astonished, all resistance lost, all courage. Down their idle weapons dropped, o'er shields and helms heads he rode. of thrones and mighty seraphim prostrate, and so forth. They wish the mountains were thrown on them. So this the judgment of the sun and the glory of the sun here on the third day. He comes out and destroys all the rebellious angels.
So one of the things that Milton wants us to do in Paradise Lost is not to just read it once, right? But to reflect and think about the poem in light of what we read later on. So think about how differently you would read book 1 and Satan's speech about his unconquerable will, right? After reading what happened there at the end of book 6, with the sun riding out in majesty and glory and Satan and all of the hosts terrified jumping out of heaven, right? I mean, Satan's rhetorical flash is certainly brilliant, but it sounds like a lot of bluster once you realize that he's just, thrown himself out of heaven.
That's a great point. Okay, I'm in, where am I? Book 8. I love, so book 7 is creation. We're skipping over that. Book 8, there's the creation of Adam and his first moments. It's a very charming scene. I think one of the most charming of all in the poem. He's naming the animals, and he has this ability to just know how to name them. 2 at 2, they approach him. This is at 350. I named them as they passed and understood their nature. With such knowledge, God endued my sudden apprehension. But in these, I found not what I thought I wanted still, and in that heavenly vision thus presumed. And he goes to God and says, where's my mate? I'm naming the animals, and I don't see one for me, a mate for me. And then God says, I'm not offended by this. What you're asking is exactly what I wanted you to ask. It's my image in you. Okay, so then he puts, look at 390. I seek a fellowship. I speak, such as I seek, fit to participate all rational delight. All right, I want to mate with. I can connect with rationally. I can't do that with a brute. Okay. And God is pleased with us. And let's see, it's not good for man to be alone. 445. A lot of biblical language here, Genesis language. And then he says that a sleep fell on him. I sunk down of sleep. And he also says that the colloquy sublime, talking with God, just exhausted him. He falls asleep, and he has one cell of his eyes. Let's see. He closed mine eyes he closed, but open left the cell of fancy, so he can see what's happening. And he says that he took from my side, my left side, a rib with cordial spirits warm, life blood streaming fresh, wide was the wound. And so forth. And a creature grew, man-like but different sex, so lovely fair, that what seemed fair in all the world seemed now mean, or in her summed up, and in her contained, and in her looks, which from that time infused sweetness in my heart unfelt before, and into all things from her air inspired, the spirit of love and amorous delight. She disappeared and left me dark. I wake to find her, or forever to deplore her loss. Okay, this is the moment we saw back in book 4 where she is wandering from him, but then he sees her again. When out of hope, behold her not far off, such as I saw her in my dream, adorned with all earth or heaven with all that earth or heaven could bestow to make her amiable. Okay, this is, I mean, how much higher could he praise Eve here? And then he goes on to say, Raphael, she's so beautiful that anytime I talk to her, I feel like everything else just falls flat. Okay. It's an important setup for what we'll see in book 9 here with the fall. But where's that line? This would be 530 to 33. Yeah. He says, Raphael, she's so wonderful. So Adam's basically telling his story now to Raphael. And he says, here I first felt passion, commotion strange, and all enjoyments else superior and unmoved, here only weak against the charm of beauty's powerful glance. Okay, Adam recognizes that he's weak when Eve is so beautiful that it's a commotion within him happens. You know, his tongue sticks to the roof of his mouth. He can't speak. We've all experienced that. Raphael says, you know what? Nature didn't fail here. Do your part. Don't be subject to her. Okay. And then we get to book 9 with the fall. And this is the climax of the book, of the poem. Milton says, my notes are now going to turn to tragic. Book 9 itself is a little mini classical tragedy. This proem of book 9 is very important because it lays out the other epics, whether it's the Aeneid or the Iliad or the Odyssey. Those three are all three of those are mentioned here. And it says, Milton says, you know, I'm not really that kind of poet. I'm not sedulous by nature to indict wars. I'm not eager by nature to write about wars. Hitherto, the only argument heroic deemed. But he says, I'm interested in the better fortitude of patience and heroic martyrdom. That's been left unsung. Okay, that's what he's about. So here we see the shift again from the classical to the Christian, the better fortitude of patience and heroic martyrdom, not the rage of Achilles, or the guile of Odysseus. Now, Adam and Eve, here they are in the garden. They've been warned about the enemy being about in the garden. Adam is telling Eve, we should stay together here, and we have an enemy in the garden. We don't really know what that means, but we need to stay together and defend each other. When you're with me, I'm better, he says. And I think when I'm with you, you're better. So we need to stay together. But Eve has an idea. She says, you know, the garden is it's overgrowing to wild. And it's only 2 of us until we have some children, until we have more hands. Maybe it'd be better if we work separately. Okay. That's going to be 322. Peter, what is driving Eve? She says, look, if I need to stay with you, how is that happy? Can I work on my own? Aren't I sufficient to stand on my own? Sufficient to have stood, though free to fall. God said, I'm sufficient. Why can't I work on my own? And they have this little bit of a disagreement. Does this mean they're already falling into sin, disagreeing with each other? So at the beginning of book 9, and just to clarify, they have this little, Adam saying, we need to stay together. Eve saying, no, I think we should separate and work separately and we'll get more done. And Adam basically lets her go. But what do you think is driving Eve to say this here?
Yeah, I mean, they're having a little bit of an argument, you know, to be sure. It's not sinful, and it's not a sin when they separate. Remember, the definition of sin for Milton is disobedience to God. So God has not given them a command about how they work. On the other hand, you know, you can see how Satan observes the separation and says, oh, this is my chance, right? It's easier for me to tempt them when alone rather than together. So Satan seizes this opportunity in their separation. And in a sense, you can see it as a reiteration of the statement biblically that it's not good for a man to be alone. Well, it's not good for a woman to be alone either, right? And that doesn't mean that the creation was not good. All things are created good. Doesn't mean that they were sinning, but it did create an opportunity for Satan. Okay.
So I've had students, and even critics have said this in some of the literature, that Milton's cheating here, that he's dealing, if they're disagreeing, then they're already in sin. But you don't see that.
No, sin in Paradise Lost means disobedience to God. So there's no sin happening yet.
Okay. And so you could call this dynamic perfection, that Adam and Eve, before the fall, Milton imagines them, they have to learn. They learn from each other. They learn by debating things, maybe even disagreeing about things and sharpening each other. It says, that Christ learned obedience through suffering. Maybe there's a parallel there. So Milton might be onto something here, that when Adam and Eve were created, they weren't created as kind of already perfect. They were innocent and righteous, but they had to learn things, and they would learn things by maybe at times even making mistakes. Is that a possibility?
Yeah, so Milton has a strong distinction between error and sin, right? I mean, error is you can have error that is not willful disobedience. And now, after the fall, error is tinged with obedience or disobedience because of original sin, right? So in other words, after the fall, and Adam actually tries to do this in book 10, Adam tries to blame the fall on just like a mistake. And of course, this is his own rationalization. But certainly in the unfallen condition, they're learning.
Very good. Let's, I know we just have a couple of minutes left. So here's Satan praising the plant, right? He leads Eve to the tree, and he does this soliloquy sort of praising it. Or I guess it's not, she's there, so a kind of monologue, praising the tree and science and the power that he's feeling. And he says, look, ye shall not die. Why should ye? By the fruit, it gives you life to knowledge. By the threatener, like calling God the threatener, look on me who have touched and tasted, yet both live and life more perfect have attained. And fate meant me by venturing higher than my lot. Did I die? I ate. Look at me. I can now talk. I'm doing better than ever. Shall that be shut to man, which to the beast is open? I mean, his arguments are so good and so brilliant that he takes her down so quickly, and he would have taken down any of us. He says, this is a happier life, knowledge of good and evil, of good, how just to keep you from that. Of good, how just, if of evil, what is evil? Be real, why not known, since easier shunned, right? And he basically ends up saying, like, God wants you to have this. He's going to be happy if you do this. And unfortunately, and then he goes on to say, like, I'm now a beast that became an internal man. You're a man who will become internal God. It's just ascending. Doesn't God want you to be ascending and being better than you are? And so he very quickly deceives Eve with this kind of argumentation, this kind of sophistry. It's brilliant, though, the way Milton depicts it. And it says, into her heart too easily won with guile, right? And she eats, and then Eve begins to have all this internal turmoil about what to do. And she starts to speak like Satan and decides to bring it to Adam. Now, what's interesting is Adam, he's making a little crown of roses for her. So he let her go, and he's like the husband who stayed home and the wife went out to work, and he stayed at home, and then she comes back and he says, he's got this little crown he's made for her to kind of praise her for having stood and succeeded. And yet he sees that she's fallen, and she's asking him to come eat of the tree, and he drops the roses and they instantly fade.
How art thou lost? How on a sudden lost, defaced, deflowered, and now to death devote.
Line, that's which line?
Where is it? I don't know, but somewhere.
Let's see. I love that line. And so why does Adam eat? Well, I'm looking for it. Peter, why does Adam eat?
Well, Adam basically decides that he can't live. There it is. O fairest of creation, last and best. It's, he eats out of idolatry. He idolizes Eve, and he says, well, I know that by eating, I'm going to be sinning and casting myself to hell, but it's better to go there with Eve than to, lose her.
Yeah, Peter, read this part for us, would you? O fairest of creation.
Yeah. O fairest of creation, last and best of all God's works, creature in whom excelled whatever can to sight or thought be formed, holy, divine, good, amiable, or sweet. How art thou lost? How on a sudden lost, defaced, deflowered, and now to death devote? Rather, how hast thou yielded to transgress the strict forbiddance? How to violate the sacred fruit forbidden? Some cursed fraud of enemy hath beguiled thee yet unknown, and me with thee hath ruined. For with thee, certain my resolution is to die. How can I live without thee? How forgo thy sweet converse and love so dearly joined, to live again in these wild woods forlorn? Should God create another Eve, and I another rib afford, yet loss of thee would never from my heart. No, no, I feel the link of nature draw me. Flesh of flesh, bone of my bone thou art, and from thy state mine never shall be parted, bliss or woe.
Oh, such good stuff right there. Gregory, what do you think? Should we keep going and finish?
We can't stop.
I mean, people can
Yeah.
leave if they need to, right?
Yeah, if they want to leave, but I think everyone should get like a little badge or a trophy if they stay to the end. But yeah, no pressure to stay.
I think we can cover the last part pretty quickly.
All right, sounds good. This is great.
Okay. Adam's choice to die with Eve. Okay. Eve also speaks in some of her monologues about maybe becoming equal with Adam or greater, superior to him. So there's this hierarchy idea that, she wants to rise above her place and then Satan's using that to tempt her, saying, if you're, again, if I'm beast and I became man-like, you as human can become godlike. And he uses the kind of logic to deceive her. But Adam is not deceived. He eats just, and it kind of, is it there's kind of nobility there perhaps, but some critics have pointed out, if you agree with Adam here, you're just recapitulating the fall. It's happening again. You're just saying, I would have done the same, I would have stood by her. But what he should have done is died for her. And we see the second Adam, of course, dies for his bride. Adam dies with her, but not for her. So that's his mistake.
That's exactly right. He should have been a first Christ, right? The second Adam, right? Christ was the second Adam, but he should have been the first Christ. He should have offered himself on her behalf, right?
Yeah.
That would have been the proper approach that would have remained in obedience to God. Instead, out of idolatry, he doesn't trust God. And so instead he disobeys in order to try to hold on to her.
Mm-hmm. And you can see how the text would allow you to have really great discussions about these things. I think that's what Milton's hoping we would have. The language here is so great as well. You can really enjoy the power of the poetry. So he's expanding on the biblical text. Peter, you said, is this I don't know, what do we make of that? Sort of paraphrasing the story and the Bible of the fall, the account of the fall is very, very short, just a couple of lines. And Milton, it creates all of this to expound on those lines. Is there I don't know, is there a tradition of doing that? Is this something new to Milton?
There is a tradition, but it's not nearly as extensive as what Milton does. But in early Latin poetry and then Old English poetry, there's a tradition of what's called biblical poetic paraphrase, which basically takes biblical passages and then expands them interpretively and adds a lot of additional language and explanation. It actually goes back to the patterns of Hebrew exegesis as well. I mean, this is midrash. This is what the rabbis do when they read the Old Testament, is they say, okay, well, what's going on behind the scenes, right? How do we understand why this is happening rather than this? And then they develop whole theories or ideas to kind of give the backstory. So, Milton is giving us the backstory in a sense.
Very good. Okay, so after the fall, I think Milton brilliantly shows you the goodness of God's creation. So God, is a speaker in book 3. If he doesn't impress you, when you look at the creation he's made and Adam and Eve themselves, the goodness of God is unmistakable in the poem. But it's destroyed by their sin, and we see the Adam and Eve now turning against each other. We see Adam now lusting after Eve. He seized her hand into a shady bank, thick overhead with verdant roof embowered. He led her, nothing loath. flowers were their couch. They have this amorous play.
So this is the moment where it turns into Marvell's poem on the Coy Mistress, right?
Okay.
So we saw earlier how there was an inversion of the Coy Mistress. Well, this is the Coy Mistress moment, right? It's the seize the day moment. Adam seizes her hand, right? And takes her, and then they have a different kind of sexual dynamic.
Mm-hmm. Now, did they have a sexual relationship before the fall?
They do, and it is celebrated both by Milton and by readers as this kind of beautiful depiction of their sexual life together. And but what we see in this moment is basically power dynamics come into play, right? So there's a much greater degree of mutuality within the husband-wife relationship before the fall, and then after the fall, it becomes all a matter of strength and weakness. And of course, the language is even reminiscent of this with the reference to, when they wake, all of a sudden, like Samson with the hair cut off, they discover their own weakness. They see that they are naked and they are ashamed.
And then Adam is now blaming Eve. Oh, Eve, in evil hour thou didst give ear to that false worm, of whomsoever taught to counterfeit man's voice, true in our fall. And then they end up in a arguing with each really not just arguing, but in a kind of bitter spat here at the end. She says basically, why didn't you stop me? Why did you let me go?
Yeah, she says, you're the head. This is this is on you. You should have commanded that I not do this, right? So she deflects and blames him. He deflects and blames her. I mean, just as an additional note, there could hardly be any cultural moment where reading Paradise Lost is more important than our own. I mean, we are in a cultural moment where there is such confusion around what it means to be made male and female in the image of God, and God's design for marriage. And that confusion extends even to those who want to follow God's design, but turn it into a kind of an overly, machismo kind of vision. And what we get in Paradise Lost is this beautiful depiction of rightly ordered hierarchy in marriage in its unfallen state. And then we get the dramatic depiction of what happens with sin, and how hierarchy turns into power, weakness, and oppression. And it's a very important corrective to our own time.
So this is the darkest moment here at the end of book 9. Now, book 10, the judgment. How is let's see, Adam is judged by the sun. The sun comes down and judges them. He says, was she thy God, that her thou didst obey before his voice? Or was she made thy guide superior or but equal, that to her thou didst resign thy manhood, and place wherein God set thee above her and made of thee? She's made of thee, and for thee, whose perfection far excelled hers in all real dignity. Adorned she was indeed, and lovely to attract thy love, not thy subjection. And her gifts were such as under government well seemed, unseemly to bear rule, which was thy part and person, hadst thou known thyself aright. Remember, Raphael had warned him not to let this happen. Is there, so was she thy God? The blame falls on Adam here.
Yeah, there's, I mean, clearly Adam is responsible, but Eve is also responsible. So, I mean, there's Adam is responsible for both Eve and himself, but so is she, and that's why there's judgment on both.
Okay. And could you say, Peter, something about, I know you wrote about the Hamlet-like nature of Adam here in book 10, but what happens in the rest of book 10? And then we'll get to what's the end of Satan look like in book 10.
Yeah. Well, there really is a Hamlet moment. You know, you may remember Hamlet's to be or not to be speech where he considers suicide. And so does Adam here. And so you might compare it to Hamlet. You might also compare it to Job in these kind of very dark moments where they really question whether they ought to exist at all. Once that they come to terms and they really see their own sinfulness. So he goes into a very dark place. And one of the things that's especially interesting is that it's actually Eve who helps Adam to turn the corner. She's the one who comes to him and says, well, it shouldn't be you, rather let me go and die instead of you. I was the one who ate the fruit first. I was the one who brought it to you and made you eat. I will offer myself. And so Eve actually does in book 10 what Adam should have done, right? She offers herself for Adam. She becomes a mini Christ in this story. And Adam is struck by this. Of course, he says, no, you can't do that. But he realizes that he is being, he's not properly taking responsibility for his sin. And so he realizes that he needs to repent. And so the end of book 10 is the two of them learning to repent of their sin.
So as I was thinking about this, doesn't Eve says, let's remain childless or we'll just perpetuate our sin. Let us seek death. 1000, 1001. Let us seek death, or he not found, supply with our own hands his office on our own selves. Let us kill ourselves. Eve, thy contempt of life and pleasure seems to argue in thee something more sublime and excellent than thy mind condemns.
Right.
Adam, let me check here in my text.
They have to help each other, right? So she offers herself, that helps him turn the corner. Then she says, okay, well, we'll live together, but let's just not have children because we don't want to perpetuate this. And then he helps her turn that corner. So they begin to help each other kind of past each other's worst impulses.
Okay, good. And what Adam recognizes is right at 10:30, he says, calling to mind the heed part of our sentence, with heed part of our sentence that thy seed shall bruise the serpent's head.
Right.
So they get some hope from that promise. And then the beginning of book 11, then they're both repentant. And it says that the only reason they repented, this is interesting, was because of grace. Prevenient grace sent from above moved the stony from their hearts and made new flesh. But what was the Hamlet moment? Do you know the line number on that, Peter? Just
yeah, let's see here.
Sure, people would like to see that. It's going to be back this way a little bit. Yeah, I'm not finding it. You have sin and death creating a bridge from earth to hell. That happens here, and Satan returns.
Yeah, it's basically Adam's long speech from 7:20.
There you go.
All the way to 8:44. And the thing that's interesting about this speech is that Adam here sounds like Satan, right? Adam is now lamenting in the same rhetorical mode that Satan did in book 1, because he has fallen and he is lamenting his sin, right? Oh, miserable if happy. We heard echoes of that in book 1 and book 4. Right? Is this the end of this new glorious world, and me so late, the glory of that glory who now become accursed of blessed? Right. And he keeps on repeating the oh in verse 7:29, 7:41, 7:71, 7:88. I have got all these O's circled in my copy here. 8:19.
Very
And
long
so,
speech.
you know, the language of lament. And so he thinks of the advisability of death here.
Okay, what happens to Satan in book 10?
Satan goes back down to hell, and
Right here we go.
he wants to go and announce this great triumph that he has managed to, tempt Eve and Adam to sin. And he's making the speech to explain what he's done. And he's expecting this great applause because, of course, the demons are always applauding Satan in hell. But there's a great moment there in 5:04 where, so having said, a while he stood expecting their universal shout and high applause to fill his ear, when contrary he hears on all sides from innumerable tongues a dismal universal hiss, the sound of public scorn. He wondered, but not long had leisure, wondering at himself now more, his visage drawn he felt to sharpen spear, his arms clung to his ribs, his legs entwining each other till supplanted, down he fell, a monstrous serpent on his belly prone, reluctant but in vain, a greater power now ruled him, punished in the shape he sinned. So basically, Satan and all the demons are being turned into serpents, and so their applause turns into the hiss of the snake, and this is both, the scorn of hissing in public debate. It's also kind of an inverted Pentecost, right? This is the hell of Pentecost in hell, where the tongues of the serpent fall upon them, and so they all hiss, and then basically he explains in the poem that every year in hell this happens to them, where they're turned into serpents and they're monstrously hungry and they go and try to eat this fruit, but it turns to ashes in their mouth. So it's a fitting final judgment on Satan in the poem.
Very good. All right. So what happens in 11 and 12? So I put it as the story of the world. Now we have a flash forward, and Michael the archangel comes down and tells Adam about the future. At first, it's very grim. Adam's lamenting and sees all the damage that his sin has done to the world. But by the end of it, we see Adam rejoicing that God turned all that evil into good. And Adam learns wisdom that he must persevere, trusting in the providence of God and patience of God and so forth. So I think I'll leave that part there, and then ask if there's any questions before we conclude. Thank you all for hanging with us.
While y'all are thinking about a question, I'll just make a note about those last two books. 11 and 12 are not easy to read, especially if you've been working with a group of students, and you get through the excitement of 9 and 10, and all of a sudden it's this kind of extended storytelling about the future. Milton intended that. He intentionally put 2 books at the end that would be harder to read. Why? He's trying to put his reader through a school of patience. Remember, the whole point of this is to create the Christian hero, not the classical hero. The classical hero is all about wrath, but the contrasting virtue to the vice of wrath is patience. And what Milton wants is he wants his readers to recognize that patience is better than wrath, better than rage, and not only to recognize it, but to learn it. And so, of course, the experience of reading through the entire poem requires patience, but especially books 11 and 12. And so reading through them is part of the process of living into what Milton is doing.
Very good.
Yeah, that's a great encouragement. I know sometimes we're tempted to maybe skip some parts or not dig into them. So that's a good encouragement. Any questions before we wrap up? You have a hand raising feature. I'm not sure if y'all are new to Zoom or pros, but there's a way to raise your hand, or you can just turn on your mic and start talking.
This is how Adam ends it, with praising the goodness of God, that out of all this good of evil shall produce, and evil turn to good. So that was how he justifies. Remember, he said at the beginning, to justify the ways of God to men, and he shows how Adam saying here, I stand in doubt whether I should repent me now of sin or rejoice that I sinned, because look at all the good God brought out of it. So he's kind of that Felix culpa idea. I mean, Milton doesn't really embrace that, but he's like walking the line here. And Adam has gone from the grimness at the end of book 11 to this delighting in how God turns evil into good. It's a wonderful conclusion.
Yeah, good stuff.
Shall we read the final lines of book 12?
Yeah, go for it, Peter. These are great lines. Yeah.
So this is the expulsion. So having seen the future of redemptive history, now Adam and Eve are being taken out by Michael, and we'll start in 624. So spake our mother Eve, and Adam heard, well pleased, but answered not. For now too high the archangel stood, and from the other hill to their fixed station, all in bright array, the cherubim descended. On the ground, gliding meteorous as evening mist, risen from a river o'er the marish glides, and gathers ground fast at the laborer's heel, homeward returning. High in front advanced, the brandished sword of God before them blazed, fierce as a comet, which with torrid heat and vapor as Libyan air adust, began to parch that temperate clime. Whereat, in either hand, the hastening angel caught our lingering parents, and to the eastern gate led them direct, and down the cliff as fast to the subjected plain, then disappeared. They, looking back, all the eastern side beheld of paradise, so late their happy seat, waved over by that flaming brand, the gate with dreadful faces thronged and fiery arms. Some natural tears they dropped, but wiped them soon. The world was all before them, where to choose their place of rest, and Providence their guide. They, hand in hand with wandering steps and slow, through Eden took their solitary way.
Excellent.
So good.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Dr. Grieser and Dr. Peter. That was fantastic. I knew I shouldn't have tried to do this just in 1 hour, but live and learn. But good stuff. Good stuff. Thanks for all of you who joined us. Look for emails about the next couple events. So more details to come about that. So hope to see you next time. Thanks again. See y'all later.
Thanks, everybody.